Hello, my name is Kayla Marie Jackson, and today we're going to be looking at Starbucks Coffee Company and its transformation and turnaround under the leadership of Howard Schultz. Howard Schultz was born in Brooklyn, and the story goes that he was fascinated by the shop owners in Brooklyn and how they just were figures in the community and how they created places for people to come together and just have relationships. In 1982, Schultz and his wife Sherry moved to Seattle to head up a small coffee company as the marketing directors called Starbucks. In 1987, Howard Schultz actually bought Starbucks, and the heart of Starbucks is said to have been created in 1993 and on a buying trip to Milan when Schultz was first introduced to an Italian espresso bar. And he tells the story that at these Italian espresso bars, he noticed just the love for fine coffee, craftsmanship, ritual, human connection, and just the fact that these Italian espresso bars were the core and heart of the community. So his goal since that trip in 1993 was for Starbucks to tell a story. As Starbucks grew, Schultz even tells that he visited hundreds of retailers, such as knife makers in Milan, or Paris-based clothing makers, or even small restaurants in New York City. And he says that at each location, he would observe the behavior of the salespeople, the presentation, the feel of the space, and just kind of observe what story, intentionally or unintentionally, the business or place of business was telling. He says here in this quote, "To Schultz, the success of a merchant depended on his or her ability to tell a story. What people see, hear, or smell, or do when they enter a space guides their feelings, entices them to celebrate whatever the seller has to offer." So through 2 decades of really aggressive growth and success, and annual growth rates at about 36%. In 2005, 2006, Schultz just really started to sense that something was off with Starbucks and the vision for his company. And this was confirmed when he looked at Starbucks comp sales. Comp sales are important because they're a barometer used to assess expansion. The declining comps really indicate that the newly opened stores were either stealing business from other stores or that there was an increase in competition. And so what he found to confirm just kind of what he was feeling and seeing but wasn't able to put a finger on was that from 2004 to 2006 there was a decrease each year in the percent sales increase. And this would be for stores that were open less than a year. So Schultz's apprehensions had been building, like I said, from 2005 to 2006. And he actually had visited hundreds of stores around the world, and he noticed an element in the texture of the store missing, he says. He says here, "At first I couldn't put my finger on it. No one thing was sapping the stores of a certain soul, rather the unintended consequences resulting from the absence of several things that had distinguished our brand were, I feared, silently deflating us." As you can see here, he says, something intrinsic to Starbucks brand was missing, an aurora of spirit. And this is really kind of going back to what the heart and the start of Starbucks was for Starbucks to be a story, to tell a story to its customers. He noted a few behaviors that really supported the fact that he thought that the heart and the core, the spirit of Starbucks was missing, despite aggressive sales and growth in 2007. He said he noticed that customers no longer necessarily had a human connection when they walked in the door. That their large new espresso machines were blocking customers' line of sight with the new redesign of stores. The smell of coffee had been replaced with the smell of burnt cheese, with Starbucks offering more food items in the front of the store. Various stores were running out of ingredients, and most upsettingly, that a lot of the store managers were no longer proud of their work or invested in the company. So relying on his instincts from the 2005, 2006, 2007, he knew it was time to act and identify these threats that were facing the company. Despite these impressive growth numbers of 36% annual growth, he knew that there was trouble on the horizon. So Schultz sent out a memo to his partners. Partners is a name that Starbucks uses for its employees. He had sent out various memos, it says, through the years in the 1980s and 90s. But this time, this memo is kind of a standout. It's something that, as you read Starbucks' story, this is kind of where the turnaround began. And in his memo, it read, part of the introduction read, over the past 10 years, in order to achieve the growth, development, and scale necessary to go from less than 1,000 stores to 13,000 stores and beyond, we have had to make a series of decisions that, in retrospect, have led to the watering down of the Starbucks experience and what some might call the commoditization of our brand. Some examples, he said, some people may not even know that we actually roast coffee and just source our coffee from the best beans and work so hard to make sure it's ethically sourced, etc. And he said that stores are cookie cutter and have lost their neighborhood feel. With these complications or just kind of compromises, he says that this has left the door open for competitors. And throughout the case study, it does talk about how even in market surveys, people were preferring McDonald's coffee. Competitors that already had the infrastructure to monitor and adjust were stepping up and starting to offer these coffee items. So Starbucks was no longer becoming kind of the main coffee, the undisputed coffee authority within the nation or even the world because of big names like McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, etc. stepping up. So in 2008, just after meeting with and gaining counsel from others, Schultz actually took back over as CEO. So in those years where he was identifying some of these things going on, he was actually just a member of the board. So on January 8th in 2008, he took back over as CEO. He talks about in the case study how he could hardly eat or sleep leading up to this decision. He actually met with Michael Dell of Dell Computers, and his story is that he successfully turned his company around through an initiative and was in a very similar situation where he also reenacted himself as CEO. And his initiative was called the Transformation Agenda, and he actually shared it with Howard Schultz, and this was something that kind of inspired and encouraged Mr. Schultz to continue to fight for what he believed in the heart of his company. In days following his return as the CEO, he took a careful look at the leadership team as one of his first plans of action, and he actually brought in a lot of new leadership through the mid-level and higher level rankings, and that included people from Amazon and other big name companies that had lots of experience and intuition. Another goal he had as CEO, pretty quickly and initially, he says, was for the company to be more open and transparent and to create a more open and transparent environment within Starbucks. So how he did this, he started holding multiple meetings with more of kind of the on-the-ground people as well as the higher management, so people in the supply chain, partner resources, operation and real estate divisions, and just really including people from all aspects of the company instead of being so secretive, letting them be involved in the decision making. He says here, when you look at growth as a strategy, it becomes somewhat seductive, addictive, but growth should not be and is not a strategy, it's a tactic. The primary lesson I've learned over the years is that growth and success can cover up a lot of mistakes. We're going to make more mistakes, but we've learned a great lesson, and as we return the company to growth, it'll be disciplined, profitable growth for the right reasons, a different kind of growth. And this just kind of mimics what was said earlier. Although those annual sales rates were at 36% or greater each year, the growth was kind of cannibalizing itself, and it was bound to kind of self-destruct, and Schultz recognized that before it even happened. Okay, so the big initiative that Schultz put out was called the 7 Big Moves. And of note, the most critical and most important move for Starbucks securing was number 1, to secure the position of the undisputed coffee, to become and reclaim the title of becoming the most undisputed coffee authority in the world. And Schultz really focused on this, although there are 7 moves listed here, really focused on this and talked about how there's 2 ways that we are going to be able to do this. Employees need to be able to share their passion, pride, and knowledge about the product. And Starbucks needs to be consumer responsive with their initiatives. Starbucks, how he kind of went about doing this with the employees was they spend over at least about $1,000, he says, in terms of training, 6 weeks worth of training for their new partners, hours and hours of different education in terms of understanding coffee, the products, the sources, etc. And I believe new store managers go through 12 weeks of training to understand products and become the undisputed coffee authorities of their store. Other principles in the 7 Big Move turnaround concept were to engage and inspire partners. And again, this kind of references the whole continuing education or education and investment that Starbucks puts into their employees in terms of educating them about the brand and the product. Ignite the emotional attachment with customers, so getting back to that heart of the coffee smell and feel. Expanding their global presence while making each store the heart of the local neighborhood. This case study talked about this a lot, about expanding, especially into China or Asia, and how slowing down growth is going to be the goal, and making sure that they continue to grow, but with the Starbucks heart in mind. Being a leader in ethical sourcing, creating innovative growth platforms worthy of our coffee. So just kind of trying to continue to be that undisputed coffee authority and not just another coffee, and deliver a sustainable economic model. Kind of reaffirming just one of the big moves mentioned previously in terms of the employees and supporting them. Schultz also really takes pride in Starbucks rewarding its employees, so they actually offer medical, dental, vision, as well as education reimbursement and incentives for not only full-time employees but part-time employees. And he says that he realized that, I believe it was 20 to 30% of their employees are part-time, so that means that the majority of the time customers are interacting with people who are part-time employees, and he wants to reward and incentivize them as well. So he said, in a series of open forums, we heard from our people asking for what I call a new paradigm, an incentive not only to stay with the company, but also to have a stake in its success. So there's definitely, Starbucks is kind of a standout company in terms of what it offers its employee, competitive pay, and these other benefits as well. And just kind of talking about prior to these changes in the transformation, this quote from Dumas 2018 kind of just points out that people issues are the core of change management. So once you kind of deal with, what your people are wanting and needing from you, and you address the people issues, other things start to fall into place. And this kind of would also reflect the whole growing without good solid bones and what Starbucks was happening with Starbucks initially. All right, so looking at kind of Howard Schultz's leadership style and how it could be aligned with John Kotter's theories of change that we've read about in Leading Change. A couple different of the steps or the processes come to mind in the 8-stage process of creating major change that Kotter lines out. And first just going to discuss creating a guiding coalition. So I feel that Howard Schultz definitely did create a guiding coalition when he made the move to become CEO. So just within the days of becoming CEO, he took a careful look at his leadership, as I mentioned before, and brought in new leaders that were recommended by his board. So one, he had counsel there. Two, I also mentioned how he reached out to Michael Dell, the owner of Dell, and reached out to him for advice. And so Cotter just kind of describes creating a guiding coalition as putting together a group with enough power to bring about change and getting the group to work like a team. And in my opinion, Howard Schultz did that, especially pretty quickly and initially when he became CEO. And two, develop a vision and strategy. Obviously, we just talking through how he created the 7 Big Moves initiative when he came back as CEO. And he put people into place, as I mentioned, with the hires above that could direct this change effort. And not only did he create the vision and strategy, he also really worked on communicating it. And so that's what I'll talk about next, is communicating the change vision. I feel that Howard Schultz definitely applied this principle, the 4th principle in Cotter's theory of change, communicating the change vision, and using every vehicle possible to communicate the change vision. So as I mentioned in the presentation, the big turnaround in 2007 was that 2007 memo that he sent out to the Starbucks partners, lining out where Starbucks needed to go in the future and what needed to change. But it was also described that he did that numerous times throughout his leadership role, and he used multiple memos and different avenues of communication with his partners. If I'm taking a step back and looking at this case study and how Howard Schultz led Starbucks, and what different theories could have been applied, maybe a little bit more, just could have been applied more. One, I would say the first principle of Cotter's 8-stage process of change, a sense of urgency. If Schultz had applied a lot of the things that he did eventually apply back in 2005 and 2006 when he was initially sensing the shift in the company, perhaps the growth could have slowed and comp sales could have improved or continued to climb. Also, this case study points out about how the stock and the stock prices of Starbucks fell almost prophetically after that. So those stock market prices, etc., could have maybe stayed at the rate and in a high rate as well. And two, although he did create a guiding coalition, perhaps when he was initially feeling these things about Starbucks and just kind of couldn't put his finger on what the problem was in 2005 and 2006, perhaps if he had brought in a guiding coalition at this time, then perhaps he would have been able to identify the problems that he couldn't quite come up with at that. My final recommendation for this case study and presentation would be to rely on leadership instincts and the core company values more quickly as they're identified. So more sense of urgency, and just to get back to the heart of the company more quickly, even if it meant taking risk, and following the 8-stage process of creating major change that Cotter outlines. I do believe that Schultz followed many of the principles, but perhaps out of order or even skipped steps. And then finally, just again, let the core values and people of the company drive decisions versus just finance. There were many examples throughout this case study where the Schultz describes that when he did that, when he listened to people first, etc., that the finances actually followed. So that is it for my presentation, and my references are attached on a Word document, and I enjoyed learning and working through this presentation.